Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Echo Wirm Live. This is a live stream that we do every other Thursday around about 4 o'clock Eastern Time, where we just go through all of the questions you guys have asked, whether it be through the channels, on Patreon, on Discord, all of our various different types of channels and services where you guys have been asking questions about what's coming up on the channel or things you have questions about with the material that we cover on the channels. So if you guys have questions that you want answered that you didn't get a chance to do before, feel free to drop them down in the live chat. We'll go through that as we do. But otherwise, the next hour or two, we'll just talk about these questions and go through them and talk about where things are going with the channel. So that being said, let's start with the first question of the day. It's one of those everybody's asking it. So I Have Too Much Fandom says, will you do the Trials of Apollo? Joe Collins says, can you please do Trials of Apollo? Yonkim says, is it possible to start on the Trials of Apollo? AGP Cowboy says, will Trials of Apollo ever come out on YouTube? Chunky Cheese says, that is the end of my Trials of Apollo questions. We'll come back to Chunky Cheese after this. But yes, the answer to all of those questions is yes. I have already done the first of the Trials of Apollo books. Right now, in my currently reading pile, is the second one, titled A Dark Prophecy. The first one is currently available over on Patreon. It's behind a $3 paywall that will be upped to a $5 paywall at New Year's, but it will come out starting as daily chapters on our regular channels in about 3 weeks. So today we just started the final book in the Kane Chronicles. That should take us 3 weeks to get through, and by the time that is done, then the next day we will start on chapter 1 of The Hidden Oracle, which is the first book in the Trials of Apollo series. And that should come up as a full version, I think, the middle of January. So it'll start daily chapters in the middle of December, and it will be up for free for you guys as a full audiobook in January. But like I said, at the moment, the first book in full is available over on Patreon, and we are currently about 15 chapters of the way through the second book over on Patreon as well. So yeah, if you guys want to join there, you're more than welcome to. Otherwise, it'll come out eventually on the channel. Xpogo Sam is in the chat saying, I'll be here for the last bit of my lunch break. I've been loving Fablehaven, but I don't remember it being so short. Is the second book scheduled yet? Eventually it will be. At the moment, yeah, Fablehaven is only 19 chapters. So I think it took me a little over 5 hours to record. It took me longer than that, but the full version is about 5 hours long. And I want to say the next one is roughly the same length, maybe a little longer. I got to look here. I think it's about the same. It looks to be about the same length, although I do have the paperback version of that one. So yeah, 19 to 20-ish chapters. But eventually that will come out as well. I'm going to put it a little back and see how well the first one does on the channel before I make a decision when to start the second one. So let's see here. Flick Street Productions says, was it hard for you to do Dune, considering how overwritten and psychedelic the writing style could be? Yes. I've mentioned this before on live streams. I love Dune a lot as a book. And as a reader, I very much enjoy reading Dune. As a narrator, it's very, very hard because a lot of the content is introspective and a lot of it is bouncing back and forth between characters, even within chapters. So one paragraph can be written from one character's perspective and then it can flip to another character. And as a narrator, trying to accompany that with the emotions that I usually give to the characters, it was very difficult to do the first book, and that's why I haven't promised you guys more than anything beyond the second book. I'm currently working on the second book. You can see it over this shoulder here, right there, Dune Messiah. That should be starting on the channel sometime end of January. Yasin Yaffe says, what is going to be the next book series that you're going to be reading that's not in the Percy Jackson world? Yeah, so we're going to get through Kane Chronicles, and then we're going to get through Trials of Apollo, and then we're going to get through Magnus Chase. And those are all of Rick Riordan's big series. Those will be accompanied by the side books, so like Sun and the Star or Percy Jackson's Greek Gods, that sort of thing. And that should take us all the way to about August, maybe September. And by the time we're done with that, then it's looking like I'll probably be finishing up Aragon, the Inheritance Cycle, as well as the Maze Runner will probably start around that time as well. So it'll take us a while to get through all of Rick Riordan's stuff. Like I said, it should be about end of next summer that we're looking at for daily chapters. But beyond that, then looking at things like Divergent, Maze Runner, Aragon, those sort of books there. Xpogo Sam says, imagine not having listened to all of Trials of Apollo yet. It couldn't be me. Yeah, like I said, first one is out for you guys over on Patreon. Otherwise, just wait until January. Let's go to a question from Chunky Cheese, like I mentioned earlier, can you please do Among the Enemy? Yeah, I have done the first 5 books in the Shadow Children sequence, as the series is called. It's a 7-book series by Margaret Peterson Haddix. I've done the first 5. The 5th one is called Among the Brave. I think it just came out a couple weeks ago. The 6th one is, at the moment, I'm hoping to get it done at New Year's. So hopefully it's out to you guys at the start of January. I'm on about a 2-month cycle for all of my non-daily chapter books. So yes, hoping to have that to you guys by the time the New Year starts. Couple questions about Kane Chronicles. Aishna says, can you read the Kane Chronicles? And It's Kamau says, will you please do the other 2 Kane Chronicles? The second one should be out now. So yesterday, the full version of Throne of Fire was made available to you guys for free over on our channel, Echo Wirm. You guys can find that there. The 3rd book is currently airing daily chapters on this channel. The first one should already be out as of this morning. And then we will get through all 21 chapters of that before moving on to Trials of Apollo. All 3 books, including the 4th book, the spin-off with Percy Jackson, are already available over on Patreon, but all of that should be available in about 3 weeks' time. Let's go to a question then from the Son of Hades, who says, I have to ask, why does your Wrath of the Triple Goddess audiobook have more views than Chalice of the Gods? That's a good question. The reason I am guessing is because my version of Wrath of the Triple Goddess was the first one available ever. I literally bought the book the morning that it came out, recorded it, spent the entire day recording it, and then had it out on YouTube the next day. And so my version of Wrath of the Triple Goddess was the first one out on YouTube. I believe it either preceded or was a day right after the official audiobook coming out on Audible. And so the fact that it was the first for anyone kind of gave it an upper hand, because there are plenty of other versions of Chalice of the Gods, and I'm sure more versions of Wrath of the Triple Goddess now coming out, but my version was the first one to come out on YouTube. Let's see here. I'm going to delete that here just because it's a spoiler. I'm sorry, I missed it real quick. The question was, why did you kill off a certain character in your book? That's a good question. The reason why does any author do anything? I didn't do it randomly. I definitely killed off a certain character for a very specific reason, and that specific reason is to progress the plot in a way that affects the other characters surrounding it. So I set up the death in a way that there were a few other options that it could have been. We knew that someone was going to die. We knew that it was very impactful, but I threw a red herring in there, trying to make the audience believe that it was another character who was going to be in the line of sight. And then, of course, the character who I actually killed off ended up dying, and now we're dealing with the repercussions of that. And so the whole point of why I killed her off as the author is to set up the rest of the story, because it wasn't supposed to happen in their eyes. And so now they're dealing with the trauma and after effects of that. Flick Street Production says, what is your opinion on original books and book series that are distributed through Amazon and can be downloaded onto Kindle for free? I've read some of them, and I like what I've read so far. Honestly, it depends how much the author is making. It all comes down to whether or not the author is satisfied with the amount of money they're making. I say this as a musician. I don't like Spotify and Apple for the fact that I don't make any money off of it. But I also like them because it allows it to be more distributable, if that makes any sense. Like, if I were to finish my book and tomorrow I wanted to put it up on Amazon for free, I could do that. I wouldn't make any money, which would be the downside, and I wouldn't but the positive side is then I wouldn't have to go through a huge distribution deal to get it out to something like Barnes & Noble, various other bookstores in person, but it would be available around the world. So it's kind of a give and take. Like, it's more accessible, but the authors aren't making as much money. So as a reader, I like it because it's more accessible. Granted, I do like physical copies of books a lot better, and I actually do read physical copies of books, and you guys can hear that when I'm doing things through the microphone here. Expogo Sam says, thank you, Yasmin. Finally, someone else asking the real questions. I'm always happy to answer questions about the radiation effect. That is my own personal book. You guys can find the first 20 chapters available, or 19 chapters available on the YouTube channel by looking at the playlist titled The Radiation Effect. Chapter 20, I believe, comes out next week. Flick Street Productions says, do you have any thoughts on Downton Abbey? I enjoyed it when it was out. I don't really have any thoughts beyond that. Question from Eleazar Sparrow, who says, I'm a little confused about the order of the Demigod Files. Can you tell me the order it goes in? Yeah, the Demigod Files is kind of a side companion book to the original Percy Jackson series, so it fits right between books 4 and 5. So you can read it as soon as you're done with Battle of the Labyrinth. It gives kind of side stories about Percy and Annabeth and various other characters and their lives at Camp Half-Blood. I have a couple other ones. Demigod Diaries is the version that's for Heroes of Olympus. There's a couple for Trials of Apollo. There's a couple for the Kane Chronicles and Magnus Chase. The key is going to be check the folder. Because on both channels, I should have all of the books in each series in chronological order. So not necessarily the order that they were written in or the order that they were published in, but the order that they fit together chronologically is how they're set up in the playlist. So definitely check that out. Yasin Yafi says, quick warning, don't bring Fablehaven to YouTube. You'll get copyrighted and you might end up getting your channel deleted instantly. I thank you for the warning. I kind of doubt that. I've been doing some research onto which authors are more strict about others, but I do appreciate it. I'll let you guys know if something happens where we have to move Fablehaven to our other channels. Let's go to a question from Nana, which is very similar, who says, is it legal to sell another person's book on YouTube? My guess is you're asking if it's legal to do audiobooks. The answer is technically yes, because it falls under fair use copyright. The issue with YouTube is the fact that YouTube's copyright policy favors the people that are making the complaints. And what I mean by that is I can legally fight against a copyright complaint in court, but YouTube doesn't have to adhere to that ruling until you go through all the legal process. And so YouTube has the option to give me a copyright strike, and in which case, if there are multiple copyright strikes, then they can take down my channel without having legal repercussions, because that's the way their system is set up. This has happened to us before with Harry Potter. That's why we have 2 separate channels at the moment, to try to protect against that. But in terms of, is it legal to sell someone else's book? The answer is no, but I'm not selling someone else's book. First of all, my YouTube channel is not monetized, so I am giving you free material. Second of all, if you're talking about my Patreon account, I am not selling someone else's book. I am selling my performance of another material. It's an adaptation of material that I have put in the work myself. If I were stealing someone else's audiobook and trying to pass it off as my own, that would be illegal. But that's not what we're doing here. So that's a little backstory about the copyright and legality of doing audiobooks the way we do on YouTube. Flick Street Productions says, did you know about the Artemis Fowl files? It includes a prequel story about Holly becoming an LEP captain and includes a villain who comes along in book 7 as the main villain. I did know about that. Eventually, once we get through all of Artemis Fowl, I will probably add that one as well. Xpogo Sam says, have you thought about the rollout strategy for publishing the first book of the Radiation Effect quite yet? Not in its entirety. I'm going to wait till I finish the book to really give it some thought. My intention is, if it takes longer than I expected to get a deal, I will probably self-publish the first book, and then make it available to you guys through like Amazon and through worldwide distributing, so you guys can buy it on Amazon. There are certain people that I will probably give free copies to, especially like my book club. But beyond that, I'm hoping to have a book deal. I'm not going to try to self-publish every single installment, because I don't think it would sell as well, and I don't think it would get the market that I want to. Yes, and Yaffe says, how long is the stream? We typically last about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So we've been going for about 15 minutes now. I would say at least an hour and a half more. A couple different questions about Magnus Chase here. Jay Blast says, I hope you do the Magnus Chase series. Cam Hardy says, can you please do Magnus Chase? Wesley Neal says, do you have plans of doing Magnus Chase after Trials of Apollo? And then Lawless Cobra has a couple different questions. First one is, are you going to do Magnus Chase? The answer to all of those is yes. I mentioned earlier in the stream, we will do Magnus Chase as soon as we're done with Trials of Apollo. So there are 5 books in Trials of Apollo. I believe it takes us to either June or July by the time we're done with those as daily chapter books on the channel. And then we will start Magnus Chase, which should take us a few more months. So by the time we're done with Rick Riordan, it should be end of next summer, maybe into next fall. Lawless Cobra also says, are you going to do Percy Jackson's Greek gods as well as the sun and the star? Yes, as soon as we're done with Trials of Apollo, Sun and the Star will come out in full the next day. I am actively recording it. I'm through about the first 10 or so chapters, and I want to say it's about 40 to 50 chapters if I remember correctly. So I'll have that done by the time we're done with Trials of Apollo, and then I'll put it out next day as a full version, so you guys don't have to wait on it as kind of an extra daily chapter book. In terms of Percy Jackson's Greek Gods, it is in the pile behind me just whenever I get to it. I'm hoping to have it finished by the time we're done with Trials of Apollo, but no promises necessarily on that. And then I think Percy Jackson's Greek Heroes, which is kind of the sequel to that, will extend a little into the future beyond that. Flick Street Productions says, I can't wait for your reading of The Arctic Incident. It's my favorite in the Artemis Fowl series. It's been a while since I've read The Arctic Incident, so I'm through about the first 3 chapters right now, and I'm curious to see how much I like it compared to the first time I read it. Let's go to a question from Amara, who says, thank you for doing Dune Messiah. Can you please do the Murderbot series by Martha Wells? I'm not familiar with the Murderbot series. I will have to check it out and add it to my list. I sent you guys, both on the channel and over on Patreon, I sent you guys kind of a progress report of everything that's going on with me and the books behind me at the moment. Fablehaven is now done. It should come out on Patreon tomorrow or tonight. I want to say tonight at midnight, and then tomorrow we'll start on Mockingjay. So Fablehaven is done. Fire and Blood is about 75% of the way through. All of my other stuff is a little less than 50%. And eventually we'll get through it all. But I just sent you guys a little bit of a progress report so you guys could see where things are sitting at the moment. Yes, and Yaffy says, what did you think of the part when a certain character betrays another character in the Trials of Apollo? I don't know if I know exactly which situation you're talking about at the moment. If it's the one from the first book, it doesn't entirely surprise me, if that makes any sense. Like, I understand the reason for it. It didn't shock me by any means, but there might be a different one that you're referring to. I'm going to try to ask you guys to keep most of the questions based on books and the channel, if that's okay with you guys. I probably won't answer just random questions like that. Sarcastic King Dude says, can you do Wings of Fire? Yes, it is very high on my list at the moment. I haven't started the first book, but as soon as we're done with like the majority of Fablehaven, probably once we're done with the Inheritance cycle, which should be about next summer, I'm going to start on Wings of Fire. So it is on my list, and it is very high on that list. Granted, the list is very, very long at the moment. I was watching YouTube says, are you reading that AEW book behind you? Are you a fan? Yeah, so the book... Can you guys hear me? I accidentally clicked Siri, I'm so sorry. Yeah, the book behind me at the moment... where's it at here? Or actually, no, it's below me. It's called Becoming All Elite, The Rise of AEW. It's a book by Michael Sidgwick from What Culture Wrestling. If you guys are familiar with What Culture, they have their own wrestling channel that covers professional wrestling. I've mentioned before on live streams, I'm a huge professional wrestling fan, and he kind of issued an open challenge a couple years. I don't know if he did or if it was one of the other hosts on their podcast, but they mentioned that there was no official audiobook for it. And I thought, well, I have an audiobook channel, I might as well try. But it's A, a very long book, and B, I don't have a ton of time to do side books based on the request that you guys have given. So eventually, yes, I will finish it. I think I want to say I'm maybe a 10th of the way through at the moment. But yeah, I'm a huge wrestling fan, and I'm hoping to have that out to you guys. Eventually, it will be the first non-fiction book that I've ever read on the channel. Question from Luke Teeter, who says, will you read any Margaret Peterson Haddocks? Yeah, I mentioned the Shadow Children series before. I have read the first 5 books of the Shadow Children series. I have not finished the last 2 yet. I'm working on the 6th one at the moment. Then she has her 8-book Missing series. I have done the first book. It's called Found. You can find it on both of the channels. I will slowly be working my way through that series as well. It's a bit longer than the Shadow Children sequence, but eventually, yes, we will do both of those. I don't know if I'll do any of her other stuff, like Turnaround, but I do like Margaret Peterson Haddocks, and as long as you guys are enjoying it, I kind of judge if you guys are enjoying properties on the channel by viewership, like average viewership. For example, like my Harry Potter and Percy Jackson readings have an average of 30,000 viewers per video, whereas my Magic Treehouse series has an average of 40 viewers per video. And so like it's easier for me to justify reading Percy Jackson than it is Magic Treehouse because of the fact that you guys enjoy them more. Flick Street Productions says, as far as Sherlock Holmes goes, do you mainly enjoy the original stories only or any other series, like The Daughter of Sherlock Holmes or the Enola Holmes series? Good question. It all depends on the adaptation for me. I don't enjoy Sherlock Holmes as films very much. I didn't really enjoy the Robert Downey Jr. films. I didn't really enjoy... I didn't enjoy the Will Ferrell version. But in terms of TV shows, I really, really enjoyed the first couple seasons of Sherlock. And then I really enjoyed Elementary. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Elementary. It was kind of an American version. There's a female Watson. I can't remember the name of the... Dominic... he was from The Crown. I can't remember the name of the guy who played Sherlock at the moment. But Elementary is a very good adaptation of it. So I think Sherlock Holmes submits itself to TV a lot better than it does to film. But I do really like the original stories. I think even the fact that they're 120 to 150 years old at the moment, they hold up really well. And there's enough context that you're not... It's not like you're reading something that's old, if that makes any sense. It makes you sit in that world for long enough that you feel like it's an easy way to interpret the stories, if that makes any sense. So I'll keep doing those. That's another one, the series that you guys haven't quite latched onto as much as maybe I'd hoped. So I'll slowly get through those. That they're sitting behind me as well. My favorite of the Sherlock Holmes is probably Hound of the Baskervilles. I know that's the stereotypical answer, but I also really, really enjoy Study in Scarlet. If you guys have seen the BBC Sherlock show with Benedict Cumberbatch, the first episode is called A Study in Pink, and that's almost exactly the same as the original story. It's obviously updated for a modern audience, but the conversations in the episode are almost word for word taken from the source material, A Study in Scarlet. Yasin Yaffe says, can you do the Magisterium? I will add it to my list. I don't know that I'm familiar with the Magisterium. Gabby Thurer says, I would love it if you would read the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson is very high on my list. I don't know if it's the Skyward series, but there are a couple different Mormon authors. Brandon Mull, obviously the author of Fablehaven, is a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints as well, and I have been continually asked to do Brandon Sanderson. And like I said, I don't know if that's the series specifically. That's at the top of my list, but Sanderson is coming as soon as I'm done with most of the Fablehaven series. Fablehaven has 5 books. There's also a sequel series that also has 5 books. I don't know if I'll do all 10. I'll probably do the first 5 and then maybe transition to Brandon Sanderson. So it is on my list, I promise. Flick Street Productions says, have you heard of the works of Sarah J. Maas, like the Wings series? Let me look it up real quick. Sometimes things don't connect in my brain when I'm thinking. So I'm going to do a quick look up of Wings. Sarah J. Maas Wings series and see if it's the one I'm thinking of. Yes, it is the one I'm thinking of. A Court of Thorns and Roses. Yes, I am familiar with it. It certainly could be on my list. If it's not on there, I'll add it and keep considering pushing it up, because you're not the first person to ask me about that. I know those are really big right now. Every time I walk by Barnes & Noble, they have advertisements for it. Isaac Lewis says, could you read Michael Grant's Gone series? I think it would be a great ad. Yeah, my answer to everything is usually yes. The big thing, like I said, is my list is very, very long. And right now we're looking at about 5 years out for everything if it's going at the bottom of the list. So I will add it to the list, but I can't promise I'll get it to you in a time that is satisfactory to you. If people stopped requesting all the Percy Jackson side books, then we might get things done faster, but I enjoy doing the Percy Jackson side books as well. Let's go to a question from Mrs. Gideons, who says, would you consider any dark romance books or series? Maybe. The big question is it, do I feel like it's appropriate for me to read on YouTube is kind of the big one. I mean, the big caveat to that answer is I'm reading Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones obviously has some significant changes to that. That is over on my Patreon account. I'm not putting that on YouTube by any means, and maybe not even putting it on Vimeo. We'll see. I really enjoy Game of Thrones. Obviously, it has some pretty dark material in it. But in terms of dark romance, the joke has been with my patrons that if we reach a certain threshold, they'll make me read 50 Shades of Grey. That's never going to happen. I'm sorry, everybody. But it would all depend. It would all depend how appropriate it would be, and we'll see if it connects with the audience. Right now, my audience is fairly young on the channel, and obviously very big Percy Jackson fans and Harry Potter fans. So if it works, maybe I'll try one and see how it clicks with the channel. Like I said, I kind of judge things based on average viewership. So, or if I enjoy reading it is the other big one. Lily VT says, can you read The Wizard of Earthsea or Dr. Faustus? I'm not familiar with either, but I will also add that to my list. I don't know that anyone's ever asked that before. Jake Wolf says, can you please read the Ranger's Apprentice books? Those I know for sure are on my list. I don't exactly remember how far down they are, but you're not the first person to request those. So know that they are on my list, and we'll get to them eventually. Flick Street Production says, did you know that the Percy Jackson series and the Kane Chronicles have their own coloring books now? It surprises me that they took that long to come out if they weren't already out. But yes, I did know that. I was going through... So I have a list of every published work that Rick Riordan has ever done. I don't know that I'll get to all of them, but I think eventually... Like, for example, I have every book in order that he's ever published. And when I was going through it, researching that, I did, in fact, see that they were coming out with new coloring books. There's also a bunch of graphic novels that I think are really well done. The interpretations of the characters in the graphic novels, I think, are really, really well created. I want to say the House of Hades one just came out or is about to come out. Let's go to a question from William McCarthy, who says, when are you planning on doing the next book in the Missing series? Good question. I mentioned that Scent is or the Missing series in general are just significantly longer than the Shadow Children series. Right now I'm doing about every 2 months I'll put out a Shadow Children book. The Missing series is going to be a little longer because they're significantly longer books. So my goal at the moment, and this is a goal, I'm not saying I'm going to do it, my goal is to have Scent out to you by April. That's sitting about 5 months from now. That gives me time to finish the Shadow Children series, and it also gives me a chance to kind of get a little bit of a start on Scent. I think there's about 40 chapters, maybe 45 chapters, and I want to say I'm through the first 2 or 3 at the moment. Let's go to a question from Matteo Bartholin, who says, will you please do Lord of the Rings? Yeah, I mentioned this before. Someone earlier mentioned that Fablehaven may get me a copyright strike on YouTube. The one that I am really aware of that will get me a copyright strike is the... sorry, I lost my train of thought there, is Lord of the Rings. Anything to do with Tolkien. It doesn't even have to be an audiobook. They attack content constantly based on the state of his estate, for lack of a better term. There are different parts of his lore that are owned by different people. And because of that, they're very strict on who is able to use what, including content creators like me. And so eventually, yes, I would like to do Lord of the Rings. I will absolutely be starting with The Hobbit, and I'll put it up on Patreon and Vimeo, but not on YouTube. It will never be up on YouTube. So just keep an eye out for that. It is on my list at the moment. It's in the pile behind me. I've gotten through maybe the first couple chapters of The Hobbit, and eventually we'll get to those too. Go to a question from Heather Moore, who says, how long are the premieres of your videos usually? Depends. I can't post a video that's more than 10 hours long. So typically the premieres aren't going to be longer than 10 hours. I know some people are frustrated by the fact that I'll post a premiere and then delete all the previous chapters. I do that to clean up the channel, makes it a little easier to find things. But if you're trying to look for certain chapters when the thing's premiering, then you can't skip ahead, which is frustrating for people. Which I understand, but it shouldn't be more than 10 hours. So if you wait a day, it should be all there for you. Question from B-Band Silly, who says, have you read books 6 and 7 of Percy Jackson yet? I have, yeah. Book 6 is called Percy Jackson and the Chalice of the Gods, and book 7 is called Wrath of the Triple Goddess. I have both of those available as audiobooks on the channel. If you search either the Camp Half-Blood Chronicles playlist or the Percy Jackson playlist, you should be able to find them. I've recommend... Looks like I lost my chat there for a second. I do apologize. I wanted to mention that you should not read books 6 and 7 immediately after book 5. You will be missing a significant amount of material. The order of the series is as I have it in the full playlists. So read the first 5 Percy Jackson books. You can read the intermediate books in between if you want. Then do Heroes of Olympus, and then do the new Percy Jackson series, the books 6 and 7. Eventually there will be an 8th book. It's currently not out. And then go ahead to Trials of Apollo. That is the order that you should read them in. Pterodactyl says, what drink do you have there? It's the same one I have every week. This is a strawberry acai refresher with lemonade, no berries, light ice. Thank you for reminding me I had it. I was getting thirsty for a second. How can you have a strawberry drink with no berries? The flavoring is strawberry, but the actual drink typically comes with like berry pieces in it. And I think that's really gross when they're wet. I don't like having food in my beverages. So I ask for them not to put the berry pieces in, but it still tastes like strawberry. Let's see here. Nexus says, are your videos in 2 times speed? No, I actually talk that fast. You guys can probably tell by the way I'm answering these questions. I naturally talk very fast. YouTube does have a speed option. You can drop it down to, I believe, 75% at the next lowest. I know for some people that's too slow. So the trade-off is either you read it too slow or you read it too fast. I know some people even speed up my videos, which to me seems maybe a little crazy. But I do naturally talk very fast. So if it's too fast for you, I'm sorry. This is like, I am not going to change my cadence because this is the one I'm comfortable with. But yes, that is naturally how fast I talk. Flick Street Productions says, another pet peeve I have is lots of people expecting and clamoring for sequels to books that are clearly intended to be standalone novels. Standalone novels are allowed to exist like series do. I agree. I've mentioned this before. The Giver is a book that came out in the 90s. It's by Lois Lowry. Now, granted, I believe she intended it to be a multi-book series. The problem is, she wrote this really, really good book that ends on a very ambiguous cliffhanger. And you're not entirely sure what the ending is supposed to mean, which makes it a very good analytical book. And I think it won the Newbery. It won a lot of awards. And then she wrote 3 sequels to it. And to me, the 3 sequels, first of all, aren't as good as the first book. They're all right. But it kills the ending of the first book. Because the first book is so ambiguous and leaves you asking all these questions like, did the main characters die? Did they find happiness? Like, what is the ending supposed to mean? And it is open to discussion kind of thing. And then by adding the sequels, she didn't let them sit. And it feels unnatural. And what you're saying is like there are books that don't actually have sequels, but people are asking for sequels. It's the same way with films. You see that a lot in the film industry right now, is making sequels that don't need to exist. There are a lot of books like that. Now, granted, I want a sequel to The Winds of Winter, or I want The Winds of Winter to come out because Dance with Dragons was not the final book in that series. And so the fact that people are clamoring for new Game of Thrones books isn't about the fact that they want more Game of Thrones books. It's that the first 5 left things on a fairly massive set of cliffhangers and have been waiting 12 years or 14 years, holy moly, on 13 years, excuse me. 2011 was the last installment. We're currently living in 2024 as of recording. But yeah, so positives and negatives. I don't need an 8th Harry Potter book. I never needed an 8th Harry Potter book. I'm mad that we got one. Let's go to a question from Blackbeard who says, are your videos the whole book? Yes. Unless it's labeled something like part 1 of 2 or part 1 of 3, typically the entire reading of a book can fit within 10 hours. For example, I think most of my Hunger Games books are between 8 and 9 hours. I know the Heroes of Olympus, all of the books I split into 2 parts. The 5th one I could have fit into 1, but by the time I got halfway through the book, it was looking like I was probably going to need more. And then anyways, bit of a side tangent, but yes, if it's labeled part 1 of something, then there's a second one, but if it doesn't, then it's just, that is the full book. Pterodactyl says, can I read Winds of Winter without reading the prequels since I watched the show? Well, you can't read Winds of Winter, period, because it's not out yet, and it probably will never be out. But, that being said, could you read it? Yes. I wouldn't, because the show leaves a significant amount of books 3 through 5 out. Like, the first season of Game of Thrones is very close to the first Game of Thrones book. The second season of Game of Thrones is very close to the second Game of Thrones book. Seasons 3 and 4 are kind of based on book 3, because a lot happens in book 3, but there's still a bit that's left out. And then books 4 and 5 are somewhat adapted, but the characters are different. They leave certain characters and plot lines out. I would definitely not read book 6, which is Winds of Winter, without reading books 4 and 5. I would say you have to read Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons in order to read Winds of Winter, because there's so much that was missing from the TV show that you're not going to have. You're going to be very confused. Who's Victarion Greyjoy? This Euron is very different than he is in the show. What is the Dorne plot? What is the, like, who are all of these characters around Daenerys? What? I haven't seen Quaithe since season 2. Like, what is going on here? You're going to be very, very confused. Let's go to a question from I Am Awesome, who says, is Percy in The Lost Hero? No, he's not. So a lot of people get really frustrated with the sequel series to Percy Jackson. It's called The Heroes of Olympus. There are 5 books. And the reason people get frustrated is because Percy Jackson doesn't appear in the first book. Now, this had to happen. And the reason it had to happen, I mentioned this before, is Rick Riordan needed to set up 3 new main characters to his story. And in order to do that, he needed a book that Percy wasn't in, because of the fact that Percy needed to set up 3 other characters, or 2 other characters. And so, if you're going to do that, you can't start a new series with Percy and then take him away and then give him back. Otherwise, the audience is going to abandon you. The problem is, most of the audience abandoned him with the first book because Percy wasn't in it. But the benefit of that is then Percy comes back in at the second book. So he's not in the first book, but he's in the second book, and that sets up 3, 4, and 5. So no, Percy's not in the first one, but you should read the first one still. Otherwise, you're going to be very confused by the time you get to the third one. Pterodactyl says, so theoretically, I can read 4, 5, and 6 only and be fine. Yeah, I mean, like I said, you're still missing a significant amount, but theoretically, you should be fine. Everything that happens before Feast for Crows is fairly similar to how it is in the Game of Thrones TV show. There's a couple different character changes. There's the Sansa subplot, which is significantly different. There's the stuff with Davos, and I'm trying to think what else is before Feast for Crows that's different. You don't get the setup with Lady Stoneheart. But beyond that, yeah, 4, 5, and 6, I think you should be fine. I would definitely recommend reading the first 3, though. The third book, Storm of Swords, is my favorite book of all time. Let's go to a question from Hollow Purple, who says, what is the Percy Jackson book after Wrath of the Triple Goddess? I don't know. It's not out yet. We talk about this pretty much every stream. So, Percy Jackson, Rick Riordan decided to go back and write more Percy Jackson books. So they take place between Heroes of Olympus and Trials of Apollo. And there's going to be 3 of them, at least three of them. The first 2 are out. The second one just came out in September. The third one we expect to come out next September, but we also have no indication of the title, the plot, or even a release date. And so I mentioned, I think it was last stream, the longer time goes on, the more I'm inclined to believe that it's going to be a Christmas book. It's just kind of like this hunch I have, because we've never really had a Christmas or even like a Yuletide version of the Percy Jackson universe. And they revealed the plot of Wrath of the Triple Goddess about a year in advance of it coming out, which was around Halloween time. Wrath of the Triple Goddess is very much a Halloween book. And so my inclination right now is the longer time goes on where we don't know about Percy Jackson Book 8, I want to say it's going to come out next Christmas instead of next September. But like I said, I have no evidence of that. It's just kind of a hunch I have based on the way that they've marketed the previous books. But yes, book 8 is not out yet, which means that technically the sequel at the moment to Wrath of the Triple Goddess is the first book in the Trials of Apollo series, which is called The Hidden Oracle. Flick Street Productions says, thoughts on the Ender's Game book series. I'm not a huge fan of Orson Scott Card's writing style, but I enjoy this. So I was having a conversation outside of YouTube with a friend of mine the other day. We were talking about, I can't remember what book it was. I want to say it was something to do with Shakespeare. And I said something along the lines of, I enjoy the story, but I don't enjoy the book, if that makes any sense. And what I mean by that is the story is very good, but I don't enjoy reading the book. I don't enjoy the little nuances in the writing style, that sort of thing. I feel that way a lot about Lord of the Rings. And what I mean by that is Lord of the Rings is a fantastic story, but I also don't need 5 pages of hearing what the hobbits are eating. You know what I mean? Like Tolkien has a habit of overwriting. This is really guilty in something like War and Peace. That's why War and Peace is, like, people regard it as the longest novel of all time. And the reason that War and Peace is so long and nothing really happens is because the descriptions are so vivid and it takes up a significant amount of space. Whereas then you get the opposite problem where people underwrite, and things like the first Percy Jackson book is very guilty of this. Like, things happen at a breakneck speed. One thing happens, and then the next chapter something else happens, and then plot point, and there's not a lot of space in it. That's why I prefer Heroes of Olympus to Percy Jackson. With Ender's Game, it's less about pacing, and it's more about the fact that I just don't really enjoy the way he writes. But at the same time, I enjoy the story. I really enjoy the setup to the if you're unaware of how Ender's Game ends, like, the first book has a huge like plot twist. Everyone who's ever seen the movie or read the book knows about it. And I thought that it was set up very, very well. I enjoy the story of Ender's Game. I just don't enjoy Orson Scott Card as an author, if that makes any sense. Kat says, did you increase your minimum Patreon price? Not yet, but I'm going to. I mentioned this last live stream. So you kind of got to back up. It's economics, right? So what happened is Apple, the people who make your phones, if you're an Apple person, decided to change the way they're doing the App Store. And this means that any app that allows people to use, like, in-app payment services, where you can sign up for things and use credit cards and whatnot in your app, they are now charging a higher price for. So in order for Patreon to be on the App Store, Apple is raising the cost for Patreon. And Patreon, having to make their ends as a capitalist corporation, then have to raise the price on me as the creator. So I have to pay a higher price for how much I'm giving them every month as a creator to use their platform. And so they're raising my, like, however much money I make on Patreon, I have to pay a certain percentage of that back to Patreon. And so with that, my current minimum price, once they flip that, basically means that I'm making nothing on Patreon. And I've said it before, like, I am totally fine doing this for free, for a living. It is very nice to have extra money if I'm giving you guys content in advance. And so over on Patreon, like I mentioned, I'm never going to gatekeep anything from you guys. Everything that's out on Patreon will eventually come out on YouTube, or it will be made available for free, like Hunger Games, that sort of thing. But if I'm going to put up something behind a paywall, it would be nice to actually make money off of it. And so I'm going to raise my minimums from $3 to $5 at New Year's. It's not a ton. I know it's to some people that is a ton, especially if you're paying multiple creators. But yes, at New Year's, my minimum price will raise from $3 to $5. So if you want to get ahead of that now, you can do so for the next month. $3 gets you about 2 months in advance of the channel at the moment. We are going to start Mockingjay, which at the moment we're airing free chapters of Catching Fire. But if you're a paying member, then we are already starting on Mockingjay. And you already have access to the first, The Hidden Oracle, which is the first book in the Trials of Apollo series. You also have access to Fablehaven, which finishes in its entirety tonight. You have access to Diary of a Wimpy Kid 4, which is coming out on the channel next week. So a bunch of stuff in advance of the channel that's not out yet is available for that $3 a month or more. Let's see here. Flick Street Productions says, I understand your opinions on overwritten writing styles. Even Owen Colfer can be guilty of this as well. He falls in the trap in the Foul Twins and sometimes in the Warp book trilogy. Yeah, I didn't see it as much in his first book, but now reading through the second of the Artemis Fowl series, I haven't read this series since I was maybe a third or fourth grader. So here I am 15 years later rereading Artemis Fowl. And I'm starting to see where I fell off with this series because I'm starting to see things like you're mentioning, the way that he kind of overwrites things. Or I try to be conscious of this in my own writing. I have a habit of putting in too many sports references. Like I'm big into sports. You can see it. You see the soccer scars behind me. Sometimes I'm wearing soccer jerseys on stream here. I'm a big sports fan. And when I'm writing my book, when I started, every single main character was a sports fan and like was obsessed with the sports teams in their local, like all of them are from different towns. So one's from Houston. She's a big Houston sports fan. And as I was writing it, I started to realize that isn't going to connect with every reader. And so as I've developed these characters, I've tried to make each one a little more nuanced. So for example, like Kent does not like sports. Liz does not like sports and makes it very clear. And they all have their own kind of intricacies on what they like and don't like, that sort of thing. So I am trying to be conscious of that as a writer. Pterodactyl says, why do you have a flag of the Bahamas? Good question. I have a flag of every country somewhere in my house. You see, obviously, the former flag of Minnesota above me. On that side of me, I am currently looking at a flag of England. I'm looking at a flag of Norway. I have a flag of Slovakia on my back wall. Another flag of Norway there. I have a lot of flags. I, in addition to books, collect flags. I have over 200 flags in a closet of mine. Pretty much every national flag. Obviously, I don't put the ones out that I probably shouldn't have in front of my house as an American citizen, based on our current political climate with certain other countries. But I do own basically every national flag, and that's just a weird obsession of mine. If you weren't able to tell by the guy who reads audiobooks on YouTube, I also have some other obsessions. Flick Street Production says, it's like he can't stand having his books be shorter than usual and relies on overwriting to pad out the length instead. He tries to do so with detail that feeds in the story and fleshes it out. Yeah, I want to say that I am guilty of this in the opposite direction. I'm sorry to keep bringing this back to me, but as someone who writes, I am going to try to defend authors, if that makes any sense. So right now, my book is looking like it's going to be about 500 pages long. To me, that is really long and almost too long. And I would like it to be less than that. The problem is, I am trying to tell a story that is paced in a way that allows the story to be fleshed out in its entirety. And in order to do that, I have to expand it beyond what I expected to when I started, if that makes any sense. And so with Orson Scott Card, I don't disagree with you. I think he pads things with unnecessary details or unnecessary side plots. Like for me, for example, there's an entire chapter in my book that is all about sports. Does it need to be in there? Not necessarily, but what it does is it sets up the motivations for certain characters. It helps build the world a little bit, and it most importantly to me expands the relationships between characters that I wouldn't be able to expand upon were I not able to give an extra chapter, if that makes any sense. With Scott Card, I don't know that it's that, but I don't know. I'm not him. Pterodactyl says, what other obsessions do you have? I mentioned I'm a huge sports fan. I'm a huge professional wrestling fan. I know every flag in the world. I collect a lot of books. Beyond that, I make spreadsheets. I have like 300 spreadsheets of just random things. I have a spreadsheet of every single college sports conference and tables detailing the standings in every sport since the beginning of the conference. So, for example, like the Southeastern Conference has been in existence for 100 years. I have every single like football ranking in their history, which don't ask me why. I'm a professional musician, so I own a lot of instruments. I spend a lot of time playing music, that sort of thing. But yeah, that's me personally. I would love to hear from you guys about what your obsessions are, if you have any weird ones. Let's go to a question from Wesley Neal, who says, when it mentions the Rizzler and Texas Hold'em in Wrath of the Triple Goddess, is that really in the book or is that just you? Good question. I want to... So I add little ad libs every once in a while. You'll see me mention the channel in my audiobooks, and I do that on purpose to try to stop people from stealing my content, which happens a lot more than you'd think. It's very weird how many times I come across another audiobook of Percy Jackson and I start playing it, and I'm like, oh, that's my voice that someone else is posting. And so to help track that down, I've put little audio tangents in there. In Wrath of the Triple Goddess, I want to say the one with Texas Hold'em, the Beyonce song, I'm pretty sure that's in there. In fact, I'd be surprised if it wasn't, because I am probably not one to put a Beyonce reference as an ad lib. The Rizzler one is absolutely mine. Someone asked before in, I think it's either Wrath of the Triple Goddess, but I want to say it's the one before it. Chalice of the Gods. There's a COVID reference in there. That was not me. That is actually in the book. Question from Barbara Trelevin. I do apologize for the pronunciation there. Asking, how do you download an audiobook? Good question. So this is kind of a Patreon-specific question. In addition to just giving people content in advance over on Patreon, one thing that you get as even the minimum tier is access to a downloadable file. I have all of my Harry Potter readings and all of my Percy Jackson readings available as downloadable audio files, not just videos. So if you guys have a device that allows you to download things onto it, like an iPhone or even an Android, I have a downloadable file for that you guys have access to. If you want access to that, just DM me privately over on Patreon, and I will get you set up with that. It'd be great if you had a Gmail account that I could send it to. Makes it very easy to give you guys access. That sort of thing. I wanted to give a shout out to a couple of my patrons at the moment, excuse me. First of all, let's find this is my national level tier. So this is $5 a month or more. These are all the people that go above and beyond the minimum level. And I just want to give a huge shout out to Andrew Gomez, Angela Rodriguez, Aiden, Adora Shadow, Braden Vera, Duncan Burley, Erin Marie Thompson, Faded, Hardip Singh, Jackson Furr, Jeff McJefferson, excuse me, Kate S., Kylie Morton, Lindsay Wood, Lucy Ranson, Lucy with an IE, Lyra MB, Mirage GSM, R., Riley Smeaton, Sadie Martinez, Sunniva Gronley, Taylor Grande, Trevor Lyman, Trusty Astorius, X-Ray, Pogo Sam, Yenny Diaz, and Alexei Staryakov. Those are my $5 a month or more patrons. And then to my top tier patrons, if you see this shows up at the end of every single chapter that we post. If you want to see yourself at the end of every chapter, this is my $10 a month or more tier. League 2 tier, that's $10, is Brandon Doty, Hessa Al-Habashi, Rockin' Ryan 99, Victoria Libretto, Rania, Katie Rose, Knickerdoodles, Goose, and Srinija Srinivasan. My $15 a month or more tier, that's League 1, is Sneavatics. And my champion tier, which is the really cool one, and I say that because for $25 a month or more every month, that's what I just said, $25 a month or more, which I know sounds like a lot for a lot of people, and I'm definitely not asking you guys to do this. But one of the benefits of doing that is every month, at the beginning of every month, I send you a free copy for no extra payment of your own beyond being a $25 a month or more member. I send you a free copy of all of the books that we're covering on the channel. We call it the Book Club. So if you want to join the Book Club, that is the champion tier, $25 a month or more on Patreon, free of charge every single month. John Buck, Charles Jacobson, Donald Easter, Dalton Bailey, Lydia Bryan, Zhukov Crawford, and Joseph Morrill. I believe I just sent out a copy of either The Dark Prophecy or The Hidden Oracle. I can't remember off the top of my head, but those are all of my top tier patrons. So to all of you guys, thank you very much. You make this possible. Mentioned it before, I will never stop doing this even if I'm not making money. I enjoy it too much. It gives me an excuse to read. That being said, it's very nice to have a little bit of a buffer. So thank you guys very much. Flick Street Productions says, one of my obsessions is biking, especially electric bikes. My other obsession is writing fan fiction. Are those obsessions of yours? Not specifically. I have different athletic obsessions, I guess. I am a big hockey player. I've mentioned on streams before, I'm a big golfer. So biking, not specifically, but in terms of writing, not necessarily fan fiction, I definitely prefer writing my own material. I'm guilty of having written fan fiction about my characters before that I didn't think would fit into a grander narrative, like short stories and whatnot. But I would say reading other people's fan fiction or even reading other people's analytics of certain stories, I would say is maybe an obsession of mine too. Pterodactyl says, I'm really into philosophical and theological subjects. I'm big into theology too. I've mentioned before on stream, if you see someone who's reading the Bible on their YouTube channel, it's probably because they are religious. And so, yes, I'm pretty into the theological debates as well. Let's go to a question from Dana Peteroy, who says, can you do Peter and the Starcatcher? I'm not familiar with Peter and the Starcatcher. I will check it out and see if it's something that I want to add to the list. But thank you for requesting. I do appreciate it. Jack Jackson says, what is coming up next on the channel? So right now, as of me recording this, on the channel, which is about 2 months behind Patreon, we are currently looking at the beginning of The Serpent's Shadow, which is the third and final book in the Kane Chronicles series. This is our late morning slot, if that makes any sense. So how we do things on the channel is every day I put out 2 chapters of something. So the early morning slot, which is 1 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time, and then the late morning slot, which is 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time. The late morning slot is, at the moment, going to always be a Rick Riordan book. And so at the moment, we're starting The Serpent's Shadow. That is over on Patreon in its entirety. But it's starting over on the channel at the moment. We're through the first chapter. I believe it's 21 chapters. Once we're done with that, which should put us about December 13th, then we're going to start on Trials of Apollo. The first book is 39 chapters. That puts us about the middle of January. By the time it's finished on the channel, should come out in full then. And then we'll move on to all of the rest of Trials of Apollo. There are 5 books. By the time we're done with the 5th one, I think we're looking about June, July-ish. And then we'll move on to Magnus Chase, which is the final of the full Rick Riordan series that we haven't done yet. Once we're done with all of the Rick Riordan stuff, then it's kind of up in the air. I mentioned earlier we'll talk about Aragon, we'll talk about the Maze Runner, that sort of thing. But in our early morning slot, which is the non-Rick Riordan stuff, right now over on Patreon, we are airing daily chapters for free of Catching Fire, the second book in the Hunger Games series. And the reason it's over on Patreon, like I mentioned, is for a copyright reason. Hunger Games is, at the moment, pretty notorious for striking people for covering their content. It mostly has to do with the films coming out, but they've been attacking content creators regardless of what they're putting out, including us. And so over on Patreon, we're doing Catching Fire. After Catching Fire, you will see Fablehaven. After Fablehaven, we will do Mockingjay. This brings us kind of up to speed with where we're at with Patreon at the moment. Patreon Mockingjay is starting tomorrow night. After Mockingjay, then I believe it's Dune Messiah, which is the second book in the Dune series. Once we're done with that, then we'll do Aragon, the first book in the Inheritance cycle. After Aragon, then we'll go back and forth between Aragon and Divergent. And once we're done with both of those series, then we're sitting at the kind of at that late summer, next fall area. And beyond that, then it's kind of up in the air at the moment. So that's what's coming up ahead on the channel. Of course, we got all of the non-daily chapter books that I'm trying to get to in my free time. Do apologize for shaking my camera there. Working my way through the A to Z Mysteries and Magic Treehouse series, which will occasionally show up on the channel. I mentioned the wrestling book. I talked about The Tale of Despero, which I'm about a quarter of the way through at the moment. I'm hoping to have that out sometime in January. I'm not going to make a promise on that necessarily, but I would like it to come out in January, hoping to have it to you by then. Behind me, I'm going to look at it this way, so I'm not moving the microphone. Fire and Blood, which is kind of the prequel book to George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones series, which is being adapted into House of the Dragon. I believe we're about 75% of the way through that. There's 23 chapters. The chapters are very long. They're about 60 pages each on average. I believe we have 6 left. 6 or 7 left. So hoping to have that out sometime early next year. Beyond that, Sun and the Star, I mentioned, will come out as soon as we're done with Trials of Apollo. City of Ember is there too. Below that, you can kind of make out Artemis Fowl 2. That's the Arctic incident. Below that is Among the Enemy, which is the 6th book in the Shadow Children series. Behind me, you can see Aragon, Dune Messiah, a bunch of those books I mentioned earlier, The Maze Runner, the Avatar Chronicles series, which is like the Dawn of Yang Chen, all of the Kyoshi books, and the one specifically behind me is the new one, which is The Reckoning of Roku. If you're an Avatar The Last Airbender fan, these are the new novels having to do with kind of the expanded lore of the series. Among the Free is back there too. That's the final book in the Shadow Children series. Divergent is back there. Sherlock Holmes. Got to move one way or the other. House of Cards, the book series. Book of Mormon. The Hobbit we mentioned earlier. Fablehaven 2. A couple more Star Wars books, and then just some other random novels there as well. So that is kind of the long term, looking at the end of next year, kind of by the time hopefully all of these have a decent handle on them. Pterodactyl says, have you ever read anything by Agatha Christie? I have. I want to say I have about 10 of her books in my possession. I am a big Agatha Christie fan. She was kind of the big... How do I word this? What Harry Potter did for young adult fiction, Agatha Christie did for mystery and murder. She's kind of like the core mystery author, if you guys are unfamiliar with Agatha Christie. She's the murder mystery writer from the 1920s and 30s. But yes, I do own a significant amount of her material. I've never read it on the channel. Eventually I'd like to do that, but I'll probably try to get through most of Sherlock Holmes before I even think about engaging with Agatha Christie. Gonna take a swig here. Feel free to keep asking questions in the chat. We'll go kind of as long as we have until we run out of questions here. Victor says, what's your favorite Percy Jackson book? Good question. My favorite Percy Jackson book in just like the Percy Jackson series, so the 7 Percy Jackson books, is going to be book 4. My favorite is Battle of the Labyrinth. I've mentioned this on stream before. Most of my favorite novels in any series are going to be the penultimate book. The word penultimate means the second to last. So I'm not always a big fan of finales. I do typically like the books right before them because they set everything up to this big climax, and they're often very, very good. For example, my favorite Hunger Games book is the second one. My favorite Harry Potter book is the 6th one. So for Percy Jackson, as well as the sequel series, The Heroes of Olympus, my favorite book in both series is the 4th one. So my favorite Percy Jackson book in just the Percy Jackson series is Battle of the Labyrinth. My favorite in the extended series is House of Hades. Simply Kinsey says, how long does it take you to read a single Percy Jackson book? Good question. I don't read continuously, typically. I've done it a couple times with the Percy Jackson series. For example, I read Wrath of the Triple Goddess entirely through. I read the entire book from cover to cover just because I wanted it out before anyone else, which is maybe a little selfish of me, but I thought it would be a cool little experiment. That took me about 10 hours. The final product was about 7 hours. So I would say on average how much time it takes me and how much editing it takes me. I can usually read through, like my audiobook is typically about 8 to 10 hours long in each Percy Jackson book. Add to that maybe 50% on top of that for editing and for like mistakes and stuff like that. And so that puts it at about 12 to 15 hours in actual like time. I will typically take a month or so to finish each Percy Jackson book. Like at the moment, Trials of Apollo is taking me about a month each to finish. And that's just because I want to get a chapter out every day. I don't do this for a full-time job by any means. I don't really make any money off of YouTube. I couldn't sustain myself from the money I make on Patreon. But I'm able to do this in my free time. And so all of the time that I'm able to put in here, then I'm putting toward Percy Jackson books. So it's just really whenever I have time. But in total, it takes me about 15 hours of reading and editing time to do each book. Let's go to a question from Catherine, who says, are you planning on doing Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and Sunrise on the Reaping? Yeah. So these are the 2 prequel books to the Hunger Games series. I've already done Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It should be out available for free over on Patreon and Vimeo. There's links in the description below this, or even on both channels you can find. But then Sunrise on the Reaping, I believe it comes out in March. This is the 5th book. It has to do with the Haymitch one, which is about 25 years before the original series. So the first Hunger Game, or the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, takes place 65 years before. This next one takes place about 25 years before. And so that I will hopefully have on the channel a few weeks after it comes out in shelves, in stores. Victor says, what is your next read? I'm just kind of mentioned this. At the moment, we're reading through Mockingjay and Book 2 of Trials of Apollo, is what I'm actively recording at the moment. On the channel, the next book is going to be Trials of Apollo. The first one. Rye says, does the Singer of Apollo come after the second Trials of Apollo book? No. So the Percy Jackson and the Singer of Apollo is a short story. It was originally published in, I can't remember which magazine, but it really has nothing to do with the rest of the series. It's a short story that takes place between the original Percy Jackson books and the Heroes of Olympus books, right between book 5 and book 1. You can really read it whenever. There is nothing spoilery about it. I believe it's coming out on the channel for free next week, Tuesday, maybe? That doesn't sound right. Maybe it came out... No, it comes out tomorrow. That's my bad. It comes out on the channel tomorrow morning. So check that out when it comes out. It's maybe half an hour long. It's just a little story about Percy and Grover doing a little mission for Apollo. It has nothing to do with Trials of Apollo beyond the fact that the characters are the same. So you can really read it whenever. Simply Kinsey says, I know this isn't really relevant because you read, but what is your favorite Disney movie? Happy to answer that if you guys have other questions like that. I know earlier I said something about don't want to answer a ton of random questions, but if you guys are curious, I'm happy to see what you guys are asking. My favorite Disney movie of all time. Ooh, good question. In terms of Disney princesses, I'd probably say Sleeping Beauty. I really like the art style in Sleeping Beauty. My favorite Disney movie of all time might be WALL-E. I know it's a Pixar movie, but I believe it was after the Pixar merge, so it's technically a Disney movie. But probably WALL-E. Pterodactyl says, have you ever hated the process of reading a book? Yes, plenty of times. There are certain books, like I mentioned, Dune, I really enjoy reading. I don't enjoy recording. Dune is very hard for me to narrate, and so I don't enjoy narrating Dune. In terms of reading, physically, there are plenty that I don't enjoy. I don't enjoy Macbeth. I don't enjoy, what's another good example? The Scarlet Letter, I didn't enjoy reading. I'm trying to think other stuff. I didn't enjoy reading Jude the Obscurer. There are a lot of books I really, really just despise reading. Just because I mentioned earlier, like things are sometimes too long and sometimes too short when I think they should be paced a certain way. I'm not the author, so I'm just being a critic, but yeah, plenty of times there are things that I don't enjoy. My job in doing this is to try to make these stories enjoyable for you, because I enjoy a lot of the books that I read on the channel. I typically wouldn't read something that I don't enjoy. And so if I can make you guys enjoy them the same way I do, then I've done my job correctly on this channel. So hopefully you guys enjoy my readings of them and interact with these stories in a way that is positive, which seems to be the case for most people. Occasionally I get a pretty rough comment, but that's okay. I try not to let them bother me. Question from William McCarthy, who says, will you do the whole Artemis Fowl series? I'll do the original ones. I don't know if I'll commit to the sequel series yet, the Fowl Twins. I want to say the first series has 6 or 7 books. I will absolutely do the first 2. My goal is to do the first full series. Beyond that, I don't necessarily have any plans beyond that at the moment, but we'll see. I have one more pre-prepared question, and then if you guys want to keep asking questions in the chat, please feel free to do so. I'm happy to answer anything that you guys are curious about. Especially, I mentioned earlier, I'm very happy to answer questions about my book, if we avoid spoilers, but I am very happy to answer anything that has to do with radiation effect as well. Flickstreet Production says, I'm going to cut out now. Thanks for another great Q&A. Very much appreciate it. Thank you. Let's go to a question from Nick, who says, when do you think you'll upload the 3rd Hunger Games book? So at the moment, it is starting on Patreon tomorrow. So tonight at 1 o'clock Eastern, we are finishing Fablehaven, and then starting tomorrow at midnight, we will be doing Mockingjay, chapter by chapter. It will air for free starting in January. I want to say January 3rd at midnight is when it will first come out. So it's, like I said, it's about a month in advance, maybe a little over a month. Who is your favorite character to write for in the Radiation Effect? Oh boy, good question. I would probably say Emma. And the reason I say Emma is, from my perspective in writing this book, Emma's chapters are the ones where the plot progresses in a way that is faster than all of the other characters. So, all of the other characters have a lot of nuances. For example, like Margot's chapters are typically about either romance or her relationship with Jordan. Jordan's are about his trauma with his mother, his relationship with Margot, his friendship with all the other people. Kent's is mostly about his jealousy, with a few exceptions. Obviously, the big main plot progression chapter has to do with Kent. But with Emma, typically her chapters are going to be the ones where the plot progresses in a way that I personally attach to in a different... Like, hers are political scheming. Hers are very much a House of Cards adaptation, because her dad is the head of the government, and so things happen for her in ways that don't happen for the other characters. So I think Emma is probably my most favorite character to write. So her character is probably the closest to the way that I think, if that makes any sense. Like, her thought process is very similar to how I think, and so for me writing her, it's a lot more natural. I don't have to really change the way that I think in order to change the way I write characters, because she is very similar to the way that I see the world, if that makes any sense. Victor says, who is your favorite hero in Heroes of Olympus? If you're going with just the 7, I would say my favorite is it's probably Percy. I like Leo a lot. I enjoy reading for Frank because of his accent. So I would say, of the 7, it's probably Percy or Leo. When you add like Nico and Reyna into the mix and make it kind of just the expanded heroes, I would say Nico is probably my favorite. Nico's my favorite character in the whole series. When will we see more cities in the radiation effect? Good question. So the radiation effect takes place in Wyoming, and it has to do with a company that has like bases around the world. So they're American bases in Wyoming. In the future, we will see a lot more of them. We've already seen the Chinese city. They visited it on their mission. We will see one more of the kind of the hub cities later on in a mission at the end of the book, as well as going forward into future books. A couple of the main characters are going to transfer out. They're going to like spend a semester abroad, and so I don't really want to spoil where that's going to be, but we will see a significant expansion of the world through those characters when they go off and live in different places. So the cast is never going to get smaller is kind of the point here, which is both a blessing and a curse, because the more you expand it out, the harder it is to tangle it back together. But we'll get there eventually, I should say. When is chapter 20 coming out? I believe it's next Tuesday. Let me double check something real quick. If it's not out, what's the date today is the question. It's already out. It is currently on the channel. It aired just as we started this live stream. So if you want to check out chapter 20, I'm currently working on chapter 21. Chapter 21 and chapter 22 kind of take place at the same time. I actually finished chapter 22 before I finished chapter 21. So chapter 21 will come out, and then maybe a week and a half later, then chapter 22 will come out. How many chapters are going to be in the book? I said 30 to begin with, and I kind of was looking at my plan for it, and in order to space out the chapters that I need to in order for like characters not to have back-to-back chapters, if that makes any sense, it's looking like it's going to be about 33 chapters. So through 20 at the moment, so we're about 2/3 of the way through the book. I'm hoping to have the book done by next summer. Probably end of next spring would be my goal, but we'll see. We'll see how fast my writing goes over the winter. Last winter it was really fast, and the summer it was really slow, so hopefully that's a good sign. Who is your least favorite character that you write for? Probably Jordan. I don't know. I don't know if there's a specific reason, but I feel like Jordan is probably the least like myself. For the same reason I like writing for Emma, I would say I dislike writing for Jordan for the exact opposite / same reason, if that makes any sense. So with that being said, if you guys don't have any other questions that you want to ask in the chat, I think we're going to wrap this one up. It was a little bit of a quick live stream today, but that's okay. I do enjoy them all the same. We're going to try to resume our podcast next Thursday. We've been going through the Harry Potter books and analyzing them chapter by chapter. I was hoping to do the first couple chapters of Chamber of Secrets last Thursday. Something popped up and I wasn't able to do that. So hopefully we're able to start and resume the podcast next Thursday. And then the next one of these Q&A live streams will come up in 2 weeks' time. So I believe we're looking at December 5th off the top of my head. I may have that date wrong, but I believe it's the 5th that we're sitting at for the next Q&A live stream. So if you have questions that you want answered that we didn't get to in the chat, drop them in the comments, drop them on a comment in any of the videos. We will cover them next time. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed today, and we will hopefully see you very, very soon.